Welcome to Philadelphia, the birthplace of America, the city of brotherly love, the home of the Liberty Bell, Independence Hall, and Ben Franklin. And of course, home to some great historic bars. In this program, we're going to explore two of them that you'll have to tour the next time you're in this town.
Hip hip, huzzah!
Plus, another one that's not too far away in Atlantic City. Trust us when we say it's worth the 1-hour drive. Our first stop is in the Old City, Philadelphia's historic district, at 138 2nd Street.
If you've ever thought that America's bars lent nothing to our country, then the City Tavern in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania will change your mind.
This was perhaps one of the most important meeting places for our founding fathers, and it's said that the City Tavern, and not Carpenter's Hall or even Independence Hall, truly shaped our nation.
If you've ever watched the series John Adams, based on the fantastic book by David McCullough, then you might have seen many scenes like this, where founding fathers gathered around tables full of drink and food, discussing or arguing our nation's future. Those scenes were based on real events, and most of those events happened here.
The history of City Tavern is a very unique one. It's actually a very spectacular one if you come right down to it. It was initially conceptually organized by 53 businessmen. Around 1770, they decided that Philadelphia needed something of opulence, vis-a-vis Richmond, Williamsburg, New York, and Boston, if you will. There was nothing of this magnitude here before. So they went, organized themselves, all put some money together, went to London, hired an architect, and told the architect, we want us to build us this magnificent brownstone. But in those days, in the 18th century, you would put your business where the business was. And the harbor was a stone throw away, literally across the street. So all the ships that would come from Europe, the traditional way would be London, Seville, Spain, Madeira, West Indies, to bring some enslaved people over, unfortunately, and a lot of the foodstuffs and a lot of beverages.
The tavern was an important place to many of the famous characters in America's most notable chapter.
Why it was so important of a place is because so many firsts happened. Like George Washington, his room is upstairs where he ate all the time. And anybody would come in, like Van Steuben or Lafayette or people. Matter of fact, John Adams and George Washington met each other for the first time right here. Think about it, right in this way where we are sitting right now.
Other than its age, why was this place so important? Well, simply put, it gave the delegates to the Continental Congress a place to speak more candidly than they would be able to do otherwise. It would allow them to meet each other informally.
It was the guys, the business people, the politicians, all the signers of the Declaration of Independence, and a lot of the negotiants. And I'm sure you can imagine, this place opened 1773. We had 3 years before the whole thing went belly up. Just imagine how many small talk conversations like you and I sit right here and saying, let's do that, let's do that. We know for a fact that Franklin, which orchestrated the French involvement, had many discussions with some French emissary here, but the final meeting was held in Carpenter's Hall, a clandestine, late at night, different direction. There was a lot of interesting thing happening here.
The original tavern was partially destroyed by a fire in 1832, and then completely demolished in 1854. But it was so important to the country that the Department of the Interior rebuilt the tavern for America's bicentennial in 1976.
The reproduction here, the Department of Interior did a fantastic job. It's exactly the same. It's 6 inches off its normal footprint and has a few modern conveniences built into it, but everything else you see is exactly the way it was. Short of not eating family style. We have a menu, but our food reflects the era. So, and the beverages,
Another interesting note is that the tavern doesn't have a bar. It has what's called a dispensary. When
people always come and say, do you have a bar? And I said, right here, well, it's not a bar. But because there was no bar, there's a dispensary. The word bar came from the bar that protected the barkeep. the dispenser, that protected you because there were no police hours. Imagine have those tankards flying on you.
The result is a tavern that is thoroughly and historically accurate.
This is our long room. As you can see, in today's standards, it's not what we would call a ballroom. But however, back then, in 1773, it was the second largest ballroom in British North America, second only to Independence Hall, which was made famous by the signing of the Declaration.
This especially includes the bar area of the tavern, or what would have been known as the dispensary. This is one of the primary reasons the City Tavern is a must-see for anyone interested in the history of our nation's bars. It is most like drinking as they did over 200 years ago.
Maybe even more of a reason to stop in for a drink is this, the period beverages. Everything they serve from their dispensary is directly drawn from the 18th century, including the mixed drinks, in this case a shrub. Also the type of rums used, the wine served, and even the beer they drank.
This is the beer that Washington and many others would make. It's like molasses. Has a real good flavor to it. Now some people really go crazy and like it. It's good to cook with too because of the high level of molasses in it. It caramelizes very well. It's good for marinating. So this is the number one. You notice I even labeled the board so that when the guests come, we can have a little card that goes along with it that can explain to them so they can read it. The most obviously powerful beer and the most requested beer and loved beer by everybody is the next one, which is inspired by Thomas Jefferson.
We can't end without mentioning the food, which again is period. Every recipe on the menu was researched and written by Chef Walter Stabe, a James Beard Foundation nominee and proprietor of the City Tavern. Chef Stabe is also a host of his own Emmy Award-winning travel and cooking show, A Taste of History.
The City Tavern in Philadelphia, the most authentic tavern you could possibly drink in anywhere in the United States. From the booze to the beer, this place is a must-see.
Before we leave the historic City Tavern, we need to talk about a very special get-together that happened here over 200 years ago. Even though the American Revolution ended in 1783, it took some time for the Founding Fathers to come up with a system of government they'd all be happy with. 4 years, in fact. And after years and months of arguing and wrangling, a government was finally created that they could all agree with. And the most important part of that government, the founding documents on which it would be based, were finally written. So, in September of 1787, all 55 of the delegates from the 13 states came back to Independence Hall to sign the U.S. Constitution. But before they signed it, they gathered at the City Tavern and, on the second floor, threw one of the most epic ragers in all of history. They were all here: George Washington, James Madison, Ben Franklin, Alexander Hamilton, and all the rest. And boy, did they party like frat boys at a kegger. According to the bill, the 55 delegates put away 100 bottles of wine, 22 bottles of porter, 12 bottles of beer, 8 bottles of whiskey, 8 bottles of hard cider, and 7 bowls of rum punch. We're talking gallons of alcohol. These guys could put it away. And apparently, things got pretty rowdy too. Also tacked onto the bill was a 2% surcharge for the damage done at the party, including broken bottles, broken bowls, a broken table, and broken chamber pot. It wasn't until September 17th that they finally dragged themselves to Independence Hall to sign the U.S. Constitution. Why did it take 2 days? Probably because they were too hungover the morning after. But in any case, on September 17, 1787, the rights of U.S. citizens were guaranteed. Definitely a party for the ages. Our second stop in Philadelphia moves us just a few blocks away to 1310 Drury Street.
You're looking at one of the most famous bar signs in the whole country. This is McGillins Old Ale House in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Established in 1860, it's one of the oldest pubs in America.
The bar was started by an Irish immigrant, came here during the potato famine. His name was William McGillin, affectionately called Pa McGillin by his patrons.
Beginning in 1845 and lasting at least until 1855, the Great Potato Famine was a period of death and devastation in Ireland. Caused by a blight on the single biggest crop in Ireland, the potato, starvation ruled the Emerald Isle, killing at least 1 million people over the course of the decade-long tragedy. Another 1 million people fled the country, and most of those went to North America. In Philadelphia, where a large number of them settled, the Irish immigrants found welcome and relief by the Quakers, who helped them relocate and start their lives all over again. At the same time, this mass migration to the city of brotherly love transformed the area and brought in many businesses that reflected what the immigrants left back home, like the beloved Irish pub.
The original name of the bar was called the Bell in Hand Tavern, which is the same as a bar in Boston. But everybody kept going to say, we're going to go see Bill McGillin, William McGillin, we're going to McGillin's. So he said, you know what, I'm going to change the name to McGillin's Old Ale House. And it's been known that practically since the beginning.
These kind of pubs were important community centers for Irish immigrants, and McGillins quickly became a popular place, and he had to expand.
McGillin lived in the building which is behind me right now. The middle part was the bar, and the far part was an oyster house. And over time, he acquired all three properties. And unfortunately, he died in 1907. But prior to that, he had brought his cousin from England, architect, draftsman, and drew up plans for a bar. And he didn't get to do that, but his wife, Catherine McGillin, affectionately called Ma McGillin, she kept up the plan for the renovation and did the renovation and expanded the property into the bar into the three properties.
Once William passed on, the pub continued to be run by his wife, Catherine, well into the 1930s.
She ran it from 1907 until she died in 1934, including she ran the bar during Prohibition. She locked the front door of the bar and vowed that nobody would ever come in through the front door until Prohibition ended.
And though the bar was always popular, it really came into its own in the mid-20th century.
A lot of movie stars came in here. Actors. W.C. Fields, the Marx Brothers, Will Rogers, John and Ethel Barrymore, all would come in here.
Today, McGillins focuses on both beer aficionados and those who simply want to drink something different.
One thing that I kind of pioneered in the city of Philadelphia, we were the first bar to completely embrace local craft brews.
They even had their own 3 beers created by a local brewery: an ale, an IPA, and a lager. Definitely try all 3 of them when you visit.
They also have a full kitchen with dishes like mile-high meatloaf, shepherd's pie, and even mussels. Spend some time looking at the memorabilia on the walls. Much of the collection is from local Philadelphia businesses that tell the story of the city's past.
So do the liquor licenses behind the bar, including the oldest from 1871. Simply put, McGillin's Old Ale House is a living legend. If you're into bars, then walking into this place is the same as meeting Muhammad Ali.
Come by McGillin's and have a beer, wander around, and just look at the history of Philadelphia displayed on the walls. This truly is a place worth traveling to.
While we're in the area, we want to take you to another important tavern, not too far away from McGillins and the City Tavern. On South Front Street, we find this historic marker, noting the location of a place called the Tun Tavern. The year was 1775, and the Continental Congress recognized the need for an amphibious fighting force that could serve on board the ships of the Continental Navy. These men would protect the ship's captain and his officers, as well as fight during ship-to-ship and ship-to-shore battles. So on November 10th, they created the Continental Marines, but now they needed men to fill its ranks. So, to carry out this task, members of Continental Congress turned to a popular man they all knew well, a Quaker named Samuel Nicholas. Nicholas was the innkeeper of a popular tavern called the Tun Tavern, which was a well-known haunt for the Founding Fathers. It was a Masonic temple, a recruiting place for the Pennsylvania militia, and was frequented by Ben Franklin, George Washington, John Adams, and all the others. Nicholas was asked to raise 2 battalions, and so he turned to the tavern's manager, Robert Mullen, making him the chief Marine recruiter. Mullen, being a smart man, set up his recruiting station in the tavern itself, and was able to immediately enlist many of the tavern's patrons. And the U.S. Marine Corps was born. Sadly, in 1781, the Tun Tavern completely burned to the ground, and eventually the city would grow up over where it once stood. But for the men of the USMC, the Tun Tavern will always be known as the birthplace of their beloved Corps. That's right, the Marine Corps was born in a bar. You can visit this historic marker yourself after downing a few at the City Tavern or McGillin's. It's a nice walk, and the air and exercise might do you some good. And even though the tavern is no longer there, visiting the marker is still a great opportunity to see some often overlooked history and to pay our respect. Our last destination takes us just an hour away to the historic summer playground of Philadelphians for the past 100 years, Atlantic City, New Jersey. Created in the mid-19th century by a visionary named Dr. Jonathan Pitney as a health resort, Atlantic City quickly became a popular travel destination for nearby Philadelphians after a railroad was created to deliver them right to the beach. It proved so popular that by 1874, the small seaside town was seeing 500,000 visitors every year. In 1870, the famous boardwalk was created, and more hotels and attractions were being built, drawing even more visitors and making Atlantic City one of the major destination spots on the entire East Coast. And as it grew, with all that money coming into the city, it also attracted a different type of businessman, the criminal type. Organized crime, including prostitution, gambling, and racketeering, thrived in the city, and these businesses catered to tourists looking for a thrill that couldn't be found on the boardwalk. By the time Prohibition rolled around, illegal juke joints and speakeasies were already part of the city's entertainment scene, and though the raids by the feds were common, the town was wet for the entire 13 years of the noble experiment. So it is with this background that we travel to our last bar for this show. Here we find ourselves at 3600 Atlantic Avenue and the very historic Knife and Fork Inn.
You wouldn't think so by looking at it, but this odd-shaped building on Atlantic Avenue has some of the most notorious history on the East Coast. This place was a haven for the political bosses and crime lords who ruled the Jersey Shore in the late 1800s and early 1900s.
This is the Knife and Fork Inn, and it definitely deserves to be on your bucket list.
The Knife and Fork was originally established in 1912 as a men's dining club. A little bit of a sordid history.
When people think of Atlantic City's connection with crime and corruption, they typically think of this guy, Enoch Nucky Johnson, because of HBO's hit show Boardwalk Empire.
But the guy who founded the Knife and Fork, William Riddle, has a similarly unsavory past.
Riddle was political boss of the Boardwalk, getting kickbacks from contract schemes like his partner in the Knife and Fork, another founder, Commodore Lewis Kiln, who got locked up for corruption in 1913.
Well, back in the day, the Commodore his name is actually Lou Cunil. It's on the plaque downstairs.
Really? So
as one of the original founding members, really, of the club. There's like politicians, there's like 8 or 10 down on this plaque that are like the local, hot shots of the day. So it was definitely a place where I'm sure Nucky Thompson as well, they all hung out, came, ate, drank.
The setup of the restaurant is unique in that the dining and the bar was on the second floor, but only men could enjoy it.
Exclusively men. There was we call the room behind you actually the ladies' lounge, because women could wait up there in that separate room until they were invited to join a man's table, but they could not come in on their own.
They were all the high-class ladies of the town.
Yeah.
While the second floor was the dining room and girls of questionable reputation waited outside, Riddle also used the top floor for gambling and possibly even prostitution. The funny thing is that Atlantic City already had all of these things. Gambling and prostitution were rampant, but what Riddle and the rest of them built was a place where gentlemen could take part in these activities.
And they did, for 8 long years, right up until Prohibition. And then, they basically continued doing what they were already doing.
Prohibition hits and it becomes this speakeasy and this place for people to come and drink. And the room we're sitting in itself, you look around and there's sort of buzzers on the wall, and underneath are sort of lockers where you can hide your liquor if there was ever a need to, or if somebody came in here that wasn't supposed to know that there was drinking going on.
Eventually, though, the feds did tire of Riddle flipping the bird at the 18th Amendment. They raided the Knife and Fork in 1927, smashing the booze and making Riddle realize his operation had to come to an end. It was sold to a local family who turned it into a public restaurant and ran it all the way until 2005, when it sold to the Doherty family, who quickly renovated it and brought it back to its roaring 20s luster.
We wanted to take over and kind of restore and refurbish it and bring back that unique Atlantic City feel that this place had. It was where the politicians came in the day and the Rat Pack, and it really had that old feel, and it had kind of fallen into a little bit of disrepair, and we wanted to really bring it back.
Now, they are a fine dining restaurant with excellent seafood and steaks, and they're also an excellent bar.
It specializes in both classic and unique cocktails like the Jezebel,
a blend of vodka and jalapeno sorbet.
It's certainly a unique drink, but here it's so easy to imagine yourself sipping it next to Nucky himself, the two of you looking at girls and talking about the day's take. It's really easy to get caught up in the history here at the Knife and Fork, and for all these reasons, this place is on our bucket list.
Before you leave Atlantic City, don't miss visiting the Irish Pub at 164 St. James Place. If you don't know where that is, look at your Monopoly board. This historic bar and hotel has been serving the city's visitors since 1903. Originally called the Elwood Hotel, this place served through Prohibition despite multiple raids by the feds. Today, it still serves as a boutique hotel and one of the best Irish bars we've ever been to. It has a great whiskey selection, a great beer selection, and wonderful food. Definitely give it a try before you leave. We hope you enjoyed our visit to some of the most historic bars found in the city of brotherly love. The next time you're in the area, bend an elbow at one or all of them. And while you're at it, see some of the local sites. There's no better way to explore America's birthplace.